Auzubillahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Welcome everyone for the ICN virtual community dinner today. So, Alhamdulillah, we have a great speaker with us, Umair Haseeb, who's going to talk about an integrational understanding of American Islam and race. So, very recently, we all know about the George Floyd case and whatnot, and what's going on with the African American community, race, and other races as well. So we thought, we have to have like couple of sessions with regards to that particular topic to educate our community and see how we can help each other and how we can support the African American community as well. So with that, I would like to thank our community dinner speakers committee for doing a fabulous job and constantly making sure that we have guest speakers and we are able to achieve this program. So before starting the program, inshallah, just a quick housekeeping activities. So tomorrow morning, we will have a survey sent to the entire community. So whoever attending the program, please fill that survey. So inshallah, it would be really helpful for us to improve better based on that survey as well. And with regards to the Q&A for today, so please post your questions on the chat available either on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, wherever you are looking at the program. So inshallah, we will consolidate the questions and we will ask the guest speaker at the end. So the program would be like, we will start now. We are starting late because of some technical difficulties, but inshallah around 7:45, we will have the speech completed and we will have the Q&A session for the 15 minutes. So with that, I request Brother Kashif, our ICN president, to introduce the speaker.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope everyone is doing great and staying safe. Would like to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the opportunity to continue to connect with our community. And thank you to the community, the ICN committee, for the monthly dinner committee that allows us to still, in these circumstances, to connect with all of us and cover the important topics. So Rahman already talked about the topic that Brother Umair is going to cover. I just wanted to welcome Brother Umair and again thank our leaders who's really coordinating these programs for us. So Brother Rahman and the entire team, really credit goes to you, because in these circumstances, it's very difficult to really get the attendees. We all are working very hard, the Shura, the board, and our community. So I thank all those who are listening to the program, and please share your feedback. This will allow us to continue to improve and bring the topics that will be more relevant that you want to listen to. With that being said, the other details, continue to look for our upcoming programs and the Eid announcement as well. And now I would like to introduce Brother Umair. We are fortunate to have him here on this program. He has been from this community and has been a catalyst for our youth, where he has given the talk and our programs before. Umair Haseeb formerly studied Arabic, Basic of Islam, and Quran in Chicago. That led him to pursue his studies in Morocco. So he did the full-time study of Arabic and Islamic law. He then started with the university in Fes in Morocco, Tarabihin. That's where he completed and got the Shahada. Along with his degree, he privately was studying under the scholars of Morocco, and with directly from them receiving the license. Hold the license in legal theory, which is the usul, Maliki law, grammar, creed, and the prophetic biography. He currently serves as the Imam of the Sayyida Fatima project at CIC under Sheikh Muhammad al-Imam, serving the south side of Chicago, as well as continuing his studies at Al-Azhar University. Really, I think he is the right person to go through the details of this topic. So I hope and pray that all of us will benefit from today's session. And again, Jazakallah khair for you attending. Brother Umair Haseeb.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me and allowing me to share this space with all of you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi والصلوات والسلام على خير المبعوث رحمة العالمين الحمد لله رب العالمين يا أكرم الأكرمين يا أول الأولين يا أجمل الأجملين سبحانك ما علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت عليم الحكيم اللهم ما فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. It's an honor for me to share the space with you all today, mashallah, alhamdulillah, and to be part of I haven't really been somebody that hadn't had the honor of really attending Islamic Center of Naperville. This is sort of my first Naperville Masjid Naperville Masjid like thing that I've ever done for you guys. So I appreciate you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing the space and holding the space for us. This is an interesting topic. It's sort of about our own history. For many of, I assume that a large portion of the community that is in Naperville and the suburbs of Chicago particularly are from the immigrant community, both subcontinent, majority subcontinent and Arab, and then a few pockets here and there. But I would assume that the vast majority of people in Naperville, mashallah, are either from the subcontinent or either Arab, inshallah ta'ala, with some people in between. It's a very beautiful thing to have, and mashallah has done such a great job. The community has riled together and come together, even at this time of of isolation and social distancing, have somehow continued to do programming and continue to celebrate the community and celebrate each other, mashallah. So I ask Allah to increase you all in this. The topic is about intergenerational race in Islam in America and how it relates to it. This is a conversation that, alhamdulillah, I think it's something that the catalyst of this is probably the recent shooting of George Floyd, as the brother had just mentioned. But it's a conversation that has been going on sort of under the rug for about Allah knows how long. But one of the intentions that we should make before having this conversation is about committing to an ongoing discussion and action, despite what the next 30-40 years, that we don't get desensitized to this stuff. It doesn't become a blip. It doesn't become a moment in time. It becomes a definitive moment, but it doesn't become simply a definitive moment or a moment in time that actually has appeal towards it. It actually calls for a universal appeal. And as believers, as Muslims, we're people that call to universal appeals of truth, and we call towards universally a piece of justice and equity, right? And this is part of our witnessing from Allah. That's why Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawamin bil qist shuhada'i lillah. He doesn't say kunu qawamin bil adl. He doesn't say stand firm for justice. He says stand firm for equity and witnesses to God, meaning that standing firm for equity, meaning recognizing that there are people that are amongst us that are unequitable in the eyes of the law, and they're amongst the dominant class, as well as the fact of the matter that justice is equal, but we don't live in an equal, fair playing field, and equity has to be served, that people need to be given their given dues, especially people that are disenfranchised and poor and have a large portion of who they are that is taken away from them. And witnesses to God, right? And witnesses to God. And it's in the same exact context, meaning standing up for equity is being a witness to Allah. May Allah make us witnesses to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to witness to his sublime reality, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. But this is a very important topic in this regard because it deals with the intergenerational reality of Muslims in America and how the history of our being here, our presence here, but also about intergenerational sustainability for the next how many ever generations that Allah allows us to be in these lands and to do da'wah and to do community in these lands. We have to sort of begin, I think we have to begin with very early on in our communities or in America and the people that came to the shores. There is this idea that, Islam in America is only maybe like 20, 30 years, right? In a sense, sure, when we're talking about dominant, what you call dominant mainstream Sunni Islam's presence in the sheer volume that we have, there's no doubt that that's unprecedented. There's no doubt that that volume is recent. and that's given variables like both birthing rates and migration into America. But you also have to recognize that the seeds were planted way before our great-great-grandfathers were twinkles in their daddy's eye, so to speak. That when, first and foremost, it is known that the first people to discover the Americas were not Europeans, but they were led by the ships that were funded and sent here by the great Mansa Musa, the king of Africa, who was the wealthiest man that had ever lived, who was one of the caretakers of the Haram Sharif in Medina and in Mecca, the two Haramains, the two sacred sanctuaries of the believers, as well as somebody that funded the maintenance of it, as well as somebody that had so much gold that he went to Egypt, he gave out so much gold that it caused an inflation. And this is one of the kings of the Muslim community, and the prides of the Muslims is the great Mansa Musa, who brings Islam to the shores of the United States of America. Who brings Muslim exploration to the shores of the United States of America, right? And further on, you see that the Muslims were incredibly vibrant in Africa, from the Muslims of Sudan and the fact that we had black Muslim prophets. I mean, there are opinions that Sayyidina Adam, because the name Adam is topsoil, like the topsoil. So he was considered darker skinned. Noah, as well as Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, was black. He looked like he was Egyptian. He was North African, like what we would compare to Ibn Kathir mentions. He even had, the African, the hair of the Ethiopians, as Ibn Kathir says, right? The hair of the Ethiopians. And you had Sayyidina Yusuf, who had to be black because he was a ruler of Egypt, and the Pharaohs were all black as well, right? The Pharaoh, the family was black. So in order for Sayyidina Musa to be accepted into the Pharaonic structure as a son, as part of the royal family initially on, he had to be somebody who was black. He had to be somebody that was like that, because that was considered royalty. As well as Sayyidina Yusuf, who's the most handsome man that ever lived. And they say that the Prophet ﷺ, when they say that, what their beauty was like, that the Prophet ﷺ had a magnanimous beauty, and Sayyidina Yusuf had a graceful beauty, right? That's what they mean by handsome when they're talking about both of them, in terms of half of the beauty of earth, half of the beauty of creation that was given to Sayyidina Yusuf. And this is stuff that's known. This is not even disputed things. These are stuff that are known. They sound disputed, but they're not, because we've been conditioned to believing that there's no way that blackness is part of the DNA of Islam. So no, blackness is part of the DNA of Islam, not simply in America, but in the history since the prophets all the way to where we have today, and everything in between. That blackness is an incredible. Ibn Jawzi has an extraordinary book on the Sudan and the Najashi, that they said that the Najashi and the Sudan he has an entire book on the blessings of that land, right? And they used to call it al-Barad al-Nasara al-Mu'minin, the place of prophetic deliverance, because this is where if it wasn't for, as Allah has written the story to be, if it wasn't for the Sudan and for the Najashis, Muslims wouldn't have had a safe haven. They wouldn't have been able to sustain their Islam. And some of the from amongst the Tabi'in, Ibn al-Jawzi said that they used to take some of the plants back to Medina and Mecca just as a tribute to, and planted in Mecca and Medina just as a tribute to the Sudan and to the history, the protection of Islam and the guardianship of Islam in that land. And that's true. All of that is true. And that's in terms of Islam. Now, if you look at what occurs later, the transatlantic slave trade, this is an incredibly important time for Muslims, because the Muslim scholars and the Muslims themselves were incredibly thrown off by this. for two reasons. Number one, that slavery had always existed, but transatlantic slavery was very new to the world. And the word sawada is means black. And as you know, the waw and the alif and the ya are the same letters. They're different variations of the alif. Like a ya and alif maksura is simply the same letter. They change in form depending on conjugation, right? That's just they differ in the terms how they're used. So what we have is called ishtiqaq al-kabir in sarf, in morphology, where we find the roots of letters, and we recognize that the word sawada and wasada and sawada are directly connected to the word sayyada, which means master, which is an upper echelon of people, right? And that just, Arabic has a way of speaking to us like that. That's why Allah revealed it in Arabic, because it's one of the languages that can actually speak to us and give us meaning through its roots. When the transatlantic slave trade occurs, a lot of the Muslims thought that when the Prophet ﷺ was asked, what is, by Gabriel, he said, Gabriel asked Prophet, he said, when is the hour? And the Prophet says the one who's asking knows more than the one being asked. And then he said, فَأَخْبِرْنِي أَنَّ الْإِمْرَاتَهَا, so tell me about its signs. Tell me about its signs. And he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, one of the signs is that he says, that the slave will give birth to his master, or the slave girl will give birth to her mistress, right? That this would be something that occurs. There are two meanings. Number one, the meaning is in the microcosm, is that the house, the home, the structure of the home will be flipped on its head. That obviously no young children would be disrespectful to parents, but the home itself would be under threat. The institution of the family, the institution of the house would be under threat. The second, in terms of the macrocosm, is that social order would be flipped on its head. And social order would be flipped on its head. The moment the believers saw that and you could ask scholars that exist today, and they'll tell you history about this, because we were just recently with the great grandson of Kunta Kinte, the direct descendant of Kunta Kinte, rahmatullah alayh, who was a Muslim. If you all watch Roots, we were with him, and they can tell you stories about their ancestors and what happened. You can go to Kunta Kinte Island in the Gambia today. You can witness all of this. It's known. It's like ma'loom dina darurat, and it's like known. It's like a known fact amongst religiosity over there. Is that when the transatlantic slave trade occurs, then the Muslims believe it's a sign of the end of time, because the social order is being flipped on its head. They also believe the way it was done, that it was obviously, this is like a minority opinion, but some of the Muslims actually believe that this was the island of the Antichrist, and we know that's not the case. But that's how traumatized they were. It's not to say that we take ruling from that. It's saying that's how traumatized they were by the transatlantic slave. Amongst those were a ton of Muslims. One of the great Muslims, Jab Suleiman or Ayub Suleiman, that was taken to the plantations of Maryland. He kept running away, and they asked him, "Why are you running away?" He would run away and get tortured, and run away and get tortured. And they asked him, "Why are you running away?" He said, "Because I'm leaving so I can go pray, so I can pray Salah." And then they captured him again. They said, "We'll just let you here. Stop running away." Because when you're running away, because he came from a lineage of kings and queens, is that, and amongst these were a plethora of Muslims, which is a question of how much of people's Islamic lineage were cut from their tradition because of this. It was a threat to not just social order, it was a threat to spirituality, it was a threat to religiosity, it was a threat to Islam, the transatlantic slave trade. They told him, rahmatullah alayh, Ayub Suleiman, rahmatullah alayh, they told him, "Why don't you just stay here and pray?" He said, "How can I pray in a place where there's no blessings?" He told that to the slave master. They were shocked. And there was another great prince that they found later, years later, they found an Arabic script that he was writing. One of them literally wrote the Surah Yasin, wrote an entire chapter of the Quran. Another had an entire journal, and they opened it, they were trying to decipher it. Later on, they found out by the Muslims, they found out that he was actually writing down the Risala of Imam Abi Zayd al-Maliki, which was a prose in the Maliki school. It's a fundamental text. in the Maliki madhab, the Risala of Imam Abi Zayd, he actually wrote down the entire Risala. You know, he wrote it down from front to end. He memorized it and he wrote it all down because he was trying to preserve Islam. This is part of, you know, that tradition, and that tradition has been cut, and that's what Islam has been here since then. And then, as you know, you sort of get to the 18th century, which you had Muslims fighting in the Civil War. You had Muslims that were very much there, present in the Civil War. You had the influx of the Uthmani, the Ottomans that came here as delegations, right? If you're in Chicago, go to the Intercontinental on Michigan Avenue. If you walk in, you'll literally if you go to the banquet hall, you'll literally see pictures of Muslims coming to visit. You'll see the top of it has a dome and a minaret, and the minaret was actually used to fill up blimps with air. If you can go there today, if you're in the Chicagoland area, you can go visit. Or the incredible amount of Andalusian influence. If you go to Florida today, there's a fort that was created by the Moors. The Moors came here way before. Were part of the first pioneers that came to America and were discredited. You had Haji Ali, who's buried in, you can get buried in Arizona. If you go to Arizona, his grave has a camel on top of it because he was a camel domesticator. It says Haji Ali on it because they couldn't pronounce his name. Haji Ali rahmatullah alayh. He was here incredibly, this is in the 1700s and the 1800s here to domestic camels, and there's a plethora of stories. And if you fast forward to the 1900s, you obviously have, the great pioneers in terms of Islam that began with which is very much on the shoulders of Black Muslims, where people often think is a nation of Islam that introduced Islam. That's not the case. The people that introduced Islam in the United States of America, number one, is that there was a heavy influence on the Qadiani movement that did a lot of da'wah in America, and unfortunately, there was a lot of issues with that. But a lot of and that naturally informs the nation of Islam. They say Fard Muhammad was a Qadiani, who was the teacher of Elijah Muhammad, right? But before that, you have people that are part of that movement that come out, like the great Imam Wali Akram, who starts the first Sunni mosque called the First Cleveland Mosque. He leaves because he saw that there was no spiritual and intellectual freedom amongst that movement, and he becomes he starts the First Cleveland Mosque. And amongst them was a great scholar that was from the Caribbean islands named Imam Dawood Faisal rahmatullah alayh. Imam Dawood Faisal rahmatullah alayh. He comes to Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance, and he was a student of the great Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Maliki, who was an Algerian scholar. And if you ever read the Martin Lings book, and Martin Lings, who wrote the Seerah of the Prophet that many of us are familiar with, he had also wrote a book called Saint of the 21st Century about Muhammad al-Ali al-Maliki. He was a student and a representative of the Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Maliki. And I didn't know this until I went overseas and studied with some teachers who asked me about him, right? And he was coming there and he was heavily involved with the jazz movement. And if you're familiar with, and I know we have old heads here that know the likes of the Ramsey Lewis Trio or John Coltrane, Soul Train by John Coltrane. Imam Muhammad Jabir, whose father led Al-Malik Shahbaz al-Hajj Malcolm X's janazah, he and others have, on good authority, will tell you that all of those jazz musicians, because of this man, Imam Dawood Faisal, they died as Muslims. They died at Shahada. They all died Shahada. In fact, John Coltrane has a song called Love Supreme, where he keeps repeating Love Supreme. That all that it was is the English translation for him of Allahu Adim, Allahu al-Adim, which was Allah Supreme, which he kept saying, which was Allah al-Adim. And that's how they maintained their Islam. You didn't have the resources you have today. You didn't have all of these resources. That Islam begins with the arts and it begins with social justice in the 20th century here in the 1900s. And that's Imam Dawood, and his masjid was running. They actually had the first Muslim conference. You can look up the first big Muslim conference that was in New York City. He goes to the UN. He appeals to the UN. He meets Malcolm X, rahmatullah alayhi, when Malcolm was a nation member, as well as after that. That becomes an incredibly rich part of our tradition. And people are being introduced to Sunni Islam. People are praying. Now, Sunnis were a little more isolationist. This is true. They were a little apolitical at that time because they believed in spirituality being the cure to everything, which is understandable. Now, amongst this, you have with the black community, you have you're literally seeing, as we're seeing today. Allah says in the Quran, وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ, when Moses told to the children of Israel, to his people, he says, أَذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ أَنْ جَاءَكُمْ مِنْ آلِ الْفِرْعَوْنِ, that remember the remembrance of Allah, the favor of God upon you when He saved you from the people of Pharaoh. يُسِمُونَكُمْ سُوءَ الْعَذَابِ, they tormented you with the most worst type of degrading type of tormenting. And look at the two things that Allah mentions. What does He mention? يَذْهَبُونَ or يُذَهِّبُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ, literally the biha, slaughtering your children, right? وَيَسْتَحُونَ نِسَاءُكُمْ, and they humiliated your women. They humiliated your women. وَفِي ذَلِكَ بَلَاءٌ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ عَظِيمٌ, this is a great trial from your Lord. And if you look at what's happening now, what are you seeing? يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَيَسْتَحُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ, that the black community was, their children were being slaughtered. Meaning you would actually have picnics at this moment where they're seeing, where white families would come together just to see black people being hung. There was a picture, you can look this up as well, of the first time of a 12-year-old boy put under the chair for a crime that he never committed. To Emmett Till's murder, who's from Summit, Illinois, which is down the street from a lot of us, goes down south to visit his family, family, which has different rules, but he's from Chicago, and he gets murdered for whistling at a woman, and the woman on her deathbed said he never never ever whistled at him. And you all know the story of Emmett Till, and the mother had an open casket, which is a catalyst to the civil rights movement. Then you have the Tuskegee Experiment, which is one of the most satanic things in the world. I mean, this was completely from Shaitan, where for 30 years the government was giving, and this is all not conspiratory, this is real. You could look and read their books, you can go to Barnes and Nobles or just Google it or something, where you were given, black people were given vaccines for good diseases for 30 years. Why do you think there's now people that don't trust vaccines? This is why they don't trust, because of trauma, because of intergenerational trauma. For 30 years, that's 3 decades of giving, and Allah knows probably more, that's conservatively. We don't know what happened later. It didn't just go away, stuff faded away slowly. That for 30 years that they were giving black people vaccines of good diseases, but it found out they were injecting them with hepatitis A and hepatitis B to kill them. Right? Wallahi, you can look this. Wallahi, I think that's an actual thing that occurs. People know this. Everybody isn't known. It's known openly. There's nothing, and nobody's apologized for this. Nobody said. They just said this is what you go through now. And then you saw the bombing of Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, where Black Americans began to make a Wall Street that competes with Wall Street, New York. And they planted a woman to come out and, accuse them of rape, and a white mob comes in and burns everything down, and there goes their economy. So when you tell black people you need to put up your bootstraps, well, they tried, but you took their boots away from them. They don't have any boots anymore. They kept trying. They tried to make a black major baseball league, right? Which was doing great, which got shut down by the government. You had, and there are so many stories of this. Now, all of this occurs. And if a man comes and tells you that white people are the devil, how easy is that to believe? And enter Elijah Muhammad, enter the nation of Islam. Because the only good explanation for all of this is white people are the devil, that these people are the devil. And as Muslims, we believe, the Sunni Muslims, we believe that this is from Shaitan. Obviously, we don't believe white people are the devil. But we believe that what these incidents and experiences are from satanic influences, very clearly, are from Dajjalic influences. And as you all know the story of Elijah Muhammad. But Elijah Muhammad has somebody that I think everybody in our community should know about. And if you don't, you need to remind your children of this man every week, especially until they know who this person is. His son named Fard Muhammad, Wallace Muhammad, Wallace Muhammad, whose Muslim name is Warith, inheritor, ad-Din of the religion Muhammad. That's his name. And he is one of the people that pushes Malcolm X to telling him what my father's doing is not Sunni Islam, because he goes to visit Egypt. His older brother, right? His older brother Akbar Muhammad, who was the board member, I believe, at American Islamic College on Irving Park Road. He passed away not too long ago, but he left the nation and he went to Al-Azhar University and he studied Arabic and he studied Islam. He didn't want to come back to America. Actually, he became an Islamic academic and he was very well versed in fiqh and usul and all of these things, as well as Tarikh al-Islamiyya, Islamic history. He was very incredibly well versed in all of those things. Now, his brother Imam Mu'tadin Muhammad, he leaves to Al-Azhar, leaves to visit his brother, and eventually, I believe, to the Haram. He comes back and he tells Malcolm X, rahmatullah alayhi, that what my father is saying, as well as the very questionable relationships his father was having, he pushes Malcolm to sort of leave nation and sort of shows him the truth. His name is Warithuddin Muhammad, inheritor of Muhammad. When him and Malcolm decide, Malcolm X gave a talk when John F. Kennedy was supposed to be got assassinated, saying this is the chickens coming home to roost, in which he denied orders that were from Elijah Muhammad to keep quiet about that. But when he defied those orders and he said the chickens came home to roost, he wasn't Muslim yet. He was still nation. He was supposed to give a talk at the Audubon. The assassins that were supposed to shoot him there the year before, or a year and a half or so before, the car broke down. If their car didn't break down, he wouldn't have been Sunni Muslim. He would have died as a nation member. But his car breaks down. And then the next year, when this thing happens, he goes to make that beautiful pilgrimage to Hajj, and he gets this, sort of becomes really imbibes the Muhammadan framework of Islam and that spirit, and he comes back. Then he gets martyred, where Allah literally says, and what happens when he comes back and says, him and Mu'tadin Muhammad say, we are now amongst Orthodox Islam. 200,000 people within 40 hours take Shahada. It's the biggest mass migration of mass conversion, mass migration into Islam that we've probably ever seen. Definitely in the West, most likely in the world. If it's most likely in the world in terms of recorded history. 200,000 people say, well, if you do it, we're down. If you do it, we're down. We're down with it. If you say, Prince, we'll ride your coattails till the cows come home, or in Muslims till the camels come home. But we'll ride your coattails. And right when that happens, and he becomes Sunni, Allah says, what? You're coming home, beloved. Time to come home. You've done your job. You've done your job. Your sins are wiped clean. You're back home to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Welcome home. We took you long enough. You know what I'm saying? Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. We should we should really pay tribute to Sayyidina Malcolm X as much as we can. Imam Mu'tadin Muhammad starts to build the community around Islam in the United States of America in the 80s. And a lot of people came through Sunni Islam through him, like Imam Siraj Wahaj and others. Many people that you know. Imam Ibrahim, who was the Imam Masjid Omar in the South Side, he has more stories than I have. But these are experiences that I have. Along that, you have one of my great uncles, Uncle Hugh Peterson, who's my uncle and my one of my teachers, but really my uncle. People like him are all taking Shahada. My first job coming back to America from overseas was I was a prison chaplain over Cook County Correctional. I was doing chaplaincy work at Cook County, and every month we would have maybe we would have 10 to 12 shahadas in my division. I'm in one division, I'm in 10, and there's a plethora of divisions. I would have 6 to 10 shahadas a month. So the highest number of people converting to Islam was from the prison system. Amongst them was Rafi, who takes shahada in prison as well, one of our great teachers that we should all, if you're in Chicago, should visit and learn from, and have a strong connection to, as well as people like him and Didi and Clyde al-Amin. These are names that we should try to be familiar with, because these are your teachers and your mentors and the people that are sort of the pioneers of our community. That he takes shahada in prison, and he comes out and also becomes part of that movement and becomes somebody that literally establishes the Muslim community in the South Side. And through that CC, that civil rights legislation, as you all know, the Immigration Reform Act is passed, and all of our families and our grandparents are allowed to come to the United States of America and start to build the community. When Reagan's administration comes in, you see setbacks on all of the civil rights acts, all of them. They all get pushed back. You have the redlining. You have the fact that now if we have Inglewood in our neighborhood where I'm at, that you have incredibly poor neighborhoods that have been redlined. Inglewood and Chicago Lawn were wealthy, very wealthy white neighborhoods. When the Depression happened, blacks in the Great Migration come up and start working in the Union stockyards in Chicago. And then black people, white people sort of realize that this is getting too caramel for me. So they leave to places like Naperville, places like Elmhurst, like Evanston, and start the suburbs, the suburban communities, where this is called white flight, as some of you know. Amongst that is Jim Crow is still there. So you can't get a job, you can't get an education, you can't own property, you can't vote, you can't go to university. There's certain bylaws that you can't partake in, et cetera, et cetera. And that obviously begins the systemic destruction of the South Side, of the West Side of Chicago. And people say that's not the case. I was one of the mosques that I'm affiliated with in Garfield Park, Illinois, in Chicago. West Side is incredibly already very damaged place. It's very socioeconomically deprived. If you've ever been to Maggie Daley Park, which is the new park in Chicago, it's a very nice, very expensive, incredibly expensive project. The funding for that park, I remember when I was in the neighborhood, 50 of the inner city schools got shut down, which 50 got shut down because they didn't have funding for it, which means that there's one teacher with too many students, right? The ratio gets messed up. There are not enough students in classrooms, and one thing leads to another. It means that these people are destined to go to prison. When you shut down a school, you're destined to go to jail. That funding was used to build Maggie Daley Park, literally, right? The future of the disenfranchised black and brown kids was used for the recreation of wealthy whites and wealthy upperclassmen, right? And I think as when all of this occurs, you, along with redlining, which is the banking loan issue, right? Along with the highway that we have in Chicago, that specifically you have one of the best universities in the world on one side, and you have one of the most disenfranchised communities on the other side. That America always has a slave class, that America needs to create a slave class as long as in order to preserve its lifestyle and preserve its needs. That's truth in every stretch of the imagination, and we need to recognize that. I think as we all know, I think a lot of us who are from the immigrant community, we're not like the community in the UK. We're sort of amongst the intelligentsia class of America that have benefited from a system and benefited from all of what was given here, that there's a fine line between us and white people, that we are benefiting, that we are not, when we say we're minorities, we're model minorities, we're the ideal minority, but we're not the same experience as blacks and Mexicans in the United States of America or in people of Latino descent in America. We have a very different experience. A lot of us come from privilege. A lot of us have different stresses, but we're not worried about our social economic survivability, nor are we is our livelihood being at threat. When our young kids get caught for crimes, you get a slap on the wrist, a lot of them, right? As opposed to I had a young student that took a shahada. He was in prison. He came to see me. He was 17, getting committed of a crime for 16 grams of marijuana, which if you ask your youth, they'll tell you that's not much. They'll say, ask them, they'll tell you it's not much. And if 16 grams or something like that, 16 grams from that, they waited for him to be an adult, 18th birthday, then they tried him and they put him in Cook County. That was 5 years ago. He's still awaiting trial. But he's still considered a convict. So now when he leaves, he still has to put the fact that he was convicted of a crime on his resume, which jobs, college, school, bank loans, you feel me, buying a car, getting a cosign, you all know it affects you directly. And so we have to be very clear about how are we complicit. And you all know the story of Sayyidina Bilal, kana ashtaki Bilal Rasulullah. He complained to the Prophet of God that Abu Dhar called him Ibn Sauda, O son of a black woman, which is not his racism. And I think it comes from a state of, just being irresponsible with his words, radiyallahu anhu, which is a learning phase for him. And the Prophet says, did you say that? He said, yeah. And he said that, he said, you are innaka al-amra fika jahiliya. You're a person that still has ignorance in your heart, meaning you have a lot to learn. Humble yourself, you need to learn. Sayyidina Abu Dhar doesn't say, interesting enough, Sayyidina Dhar is Bedouin. So he's actually just as dark as Bilal radiallahu anha. So when he's saying Ya ibn Sauda, he's not saying talking about color. He's saying you're Bedouin, you're black and I'm Arab. You're black and I'm Arab. I know Qurayshi and you're Sud. I know Qurayshi and you're black. It's an ethnic reality. And this is one of the things that our community has to come to terms with, is ethnocentrism and religiosity. And Sayyidina Abu Dhar doesn't say, I got black friends, I emancipated black people, I fought whatever. You know what I'm saying? He never said that. What he said, he put his head on the ground and asked Sayyidina Bilal to put his foot on his face. And Sayyidina Bilal refuses, and he said, I'm not leaving until he put it on first. Proverbially, I think the community needs to put his face on the ground and say, how can we help? I'm sorry, we're complicit, how can we help? And this is nothing to be ashamed of. We need to first and foremost be very open about our ethnocentric realities. We need to be very open about our identity religion that's simply based out of our ethnic and comfort identity based off our comfort zone. That we need to move out to our comfort zone, and we need to recognize the black community not as some poor, disenfranchised, miskeen, like, oh, you're just, you know what I'm saying, like, I feel bad, we're gonna help, like whatever. No, you need to recognize them as part of a core part of the survivability of the Ummah of America, of Muslims in America. The sort of spiritual ancestors of the du'as that they made, where you're the acceptance of their du'a, of the great lineage of Islamic spirituality that you have in this country, that you're an acceptance of that du'a. So and those are the people that Sayyidina Malcolm X took his blood for that. He died for you and me to be able to be Muslim. He died for it. And he knew he was going to die for it. They asked him, why don't you come to Africa? We'll save you. You'll be fine, because he knew he was about to get killed. The FBI was following him. And his wife, Betty Shabazz, she says that his response was, I don't need to go anywhere, because if a bullet goes through me, Allah ordained it to go through me. Rahmatullah alayhi. Allah ordained it to go through me. And when he was on his getting assassinated, he actually asked his bodyguard. He said, my wife Betty is calling. Call me. Go call her back. He goes to the payphone, and as Malcolm's already on stage, he turns on he picks up the payphone, and he sees Betty and the daughters walking inside. He says, wait a minute, they're here. Why am I calling? Why did Malcolm lie to me? Why is he trying to get me to get out of this building? And when he notices it, he hears gunshots, right? He hears gunshots. Sayyidina Malcolm X didn't want him to take a bullet that he was supposed to take. And his last action was nothing short of heroic. His last action. If forget all of the stuff that he did. If one of us can go out like that, may Allah give us a beautiful ending. But if we can go out like that, you know what I'm saying? Just go out like that. Betty Shahbaz, his wife, who was a burn victim, she got burned. And Imam Jabir, Muhammad's father, she told me that Imam Jabir said his father used to go 5 times a day there, sometimes 4 times if he could, 5 times a day to the hospital, and she was completely burnt, completely head to toe burnt. And he asked for him to come to the masjid so he can lead her in prayer. And she used to pray with what? She used to pray with her finger, because she couldn't move the rest of her body. These are people that are spiritually strong people. These are people that were Muslim, and they believed this from the cradle to the grave, and they were ready to die for this thing. So we need to tip our hats from that, and we ask Allah to, I think I went over time, so quickly, I think, with 30 seconds, I'll try to say some things to, take away for people, especially this community. Number one is recognize, the Prophet said, who doesn't show reverence to their elders and mercy to the young people, they're not from us. Number one is beginning with gratitude. The elders of your own community, show them gratitude for the young people, for all. We have a lot to criticize. We can, mashallah, criticize so that, we can criticize without an end. But I think begin with gratitude, begin with saying thank you, and begin with gratitude to the Black community. Actually go there and just with grace and with reverence, and appeal to them with reverence. Appeal to the Black Muslim elders with reverence. And then begin to build frameworks of intergenerational sustainability of Islamic justice, which will only happen if we hold hands. The Prophet says, Inna Allah yarzuqukum wa yansurukum min du'afaikum wa fuqara'ikum. He said, Allah provides for you and he saves you from the poor and the disenfranchised amongst you. And they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked them, companions, "Ala nabi'ukum ahlul jannah, shall I tell you the people of paradise?" He said, "Kullu da'if wa mutada'if," all the weak and the ones that have been made weak. And he said, and he said, "Ala nabi'ukum ahlun nar, shall I tell you the people of fire?" He said, "Kullu jawat al-'utl and mustakabbir," all the self-entitled, boast, arrogant ones. May Allah forgive all the self-entitled, arrogant ones. The self-entitled, arrogant ones, right? Inna Allah la yuhibbu kullal mukhtalin fakhur. Allah does not like the self-entitled boasters. May I ask Allah for ease. Jazakallahu lakum wa alf khair wa nasallallahu lana wa lakum kamal at-tawfiq. Inshallah, I apologize. I went over.
No, Umair Haseeb.
I didn't wait too. I'm sorry.
No, alhamdulillah. I was taking notes. I think almost my paper. I mean, one page was full. Amazing history, alhamdulillah. You took us like long back, alhamdulillah. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I hope our community also did enjoy that. So we were talking about Malcolm X, right? Alhamdulillah, it has gone and I believe like tomorrow, inshallah, at our 75th masjid location, we are having a drive-in movie plus civic justice. So the drive-in movie is about Malcolm X. I believe most of our community can attend that and get benefit out of it and learn more about Malcolm X, inshallah. So I'm seeing a couple of questions here. Again, the question was about Malcolm X as well. So can you please elaborate on the relationship between Malcolm X and Imam W. Deen Muhammad?
Can you elaborate on the relation? Imam W. D. Muhammad is the son of Elijah Muhammad. So as you know, there was already a great deal of interaction between them when they were both in the Nation of Islam. One of somebody to really speak to about this is Clyde Al-Amin, ClydeElamin, Clyde Al-Amin. He's one of the board members for Chicago State and CPS, mashallah. He's witnessed all of this. You know, he witnessed this whole thing with his eyes. He's an elderly, mashallah, but he's one of our, what we call our elder statesmen. We call them OGs, which means older gentlemen. That's not what it means. I'm kidding. But like he says, he's one of the elder statesmen, as well as Imam Ibrahim, who's Imam Ibrahim, who's an imam in the south side of Chicago. They're people to really speak on this because they came to Islam from that community. They came literally from that experience. I mean, that was their presentation of Islam, and as well as Uncle Rafi Peterson. And Sister Ndidi, her name is Sister Ndidi, mashallah ta'ala. She's actually, Imam Ibrahim Muhammad, he was one of the first people to go to Syria, and he created a relationship between the black community in Jami' Abu Nur University in Damascus. Abu Nur in Damascus, and he was with the Grand Mufti of Damascus, and the Grand Mufti he actually created a program so they can funnel in students from the black community, right? And Sister Ndidi and her mother were actually one of those first cohorts to go there and study Arabic and come back, right? And started to teach their community. And obviously, Dr. Rami Nashashibi at Iman is a very important tool to have to speak on these issues, because he was actually with Imam Ibrahim Muhammad in his deathbed. Imam Ibrahim Muhammad Janazah was at Islamic Foundation. I don't know if you guys remember. It was like literally 5,000 people flying in. It was outside. This is pre-COVID, so obviously it was outside because it couldn't fit people inside, not because they had to be outside. But his relationship he was one of the people that sort of partners up and with Malcolm X and takes Malcolm by the hand and sort of, I began the thing with saying, Kunu qawamin bil shuhada lillah. This is the verse in the Quran: be people that stand firm for justice, witnesses to Allah. It's very easy to do that first part. The second part is really difficult when Allah says, "Walau ala anfusikum aw walidayk," even walidain, like even if it's against yourself or your mom and your dad. It's very easy to stand from justice when it's outside, but Allah begins with what? Inside yourself. You're talking about yourself, and then He goes in your house, your parents, and your family. So He's talking about the microcosm, meaning we talk about injustice outside, but we forget about the fault Fir'aun inside. You guys with me? We talk about the Fir'aun outside, but you got to address the Fir'aun. Imam Ghazali said, in a way, Fir'aun, this is he's trying to make a point. It's not a theological statement. He's trying to make a point here. He's saying, in a way, Al-Fir'aun, the Pharaoh is better than all of us in that, لما قال أنا ربكم أعلى when he said, I am the Lord of the world, he said something that we don't say, but we actually believe about ourselves. You know what I'm saying? We believe we're all that in a bag of chips. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying we believe, you know what I'm saying? We actually believe, we believe like, you know what I'm saying? That the first racist is what? Technically is a devil. Ana khayru minhum. Why am I better than you? You made me from smoke with fire, you made it from clay. It's a race thing. I'm a different race than him. I'm a better race than him. The Imam Muhammad begins at home and he starts to speak on the Pharaoh at home. And he says, he goes against toe-to-toe to his father. And he's the one that tells Malcolm about the funny business that's happening within the Nation of Islam. Not to say the nation is not a big part of our sustainability in America, but that's just what happened. There was a lot of problems with the nation. And then, you know, whether the nation had all the money, Malcolm X was doing fine with the nation, right? Like the nation has 12,000 members when he comes in, 60,000 members when he leaves. He brings that's like a 700% increase in membership, right? Something like that. It's crazy. He creates the newspaper Muhammad Speaks, all of these things. So he's doing very well. When he leaves, he only had one shirt in his closet. He only had a shirt. Everything was taken from him. If they're rich or they're poor, Allah has more priority than that. He recognizes that, right? And Muhammad recognized Allah had more priority than that. And then he says something very interesting. Malcolm, you know, the FBI came to Malcolm's house, and he has it recorded. And they said, subhanallah, they said his house was, at this point, he was getting sued by the nation. The house that he was living in was under the name of the nation, and he leaves the nation. If he leaves the house, he's homeless. And they were literally suing him. They were about to burn his house down, the nation, right? The FBI comes and says, you know, the nation basically abandoned you. Is there anything you could tell us about the Nation of Islam, that is about Elijah, that we can have, and we'll take care of you. You just give us some information, we'll make sure you're set. We'll make sure your family is set for the next forever. You won't have to worry about a thing. You put what? If you put the moon on my right hand and the sun in my left, right? Mm-hmm. Remember that? If you put the moon on my right hand, he said, I'm not telling you anything. There's nothing I have to tell. Because he realized that he's just speaking to a different type of devil. There's nothing you could give me. And Worthy Muhammad is the one that sort of pushes him throughout that, because Sayyidina Malcolm was a man of principle. He was a man of principle, that he never budged on his principles, right? And Allah says, and he didn't retaliate with that, because he could have just said, all right, it's become personal. I'm going to take out, my whole thing is going to take out, my whole MO now is going to take out the nation for what they did to me. It could have been vengeance. What does Allah say in the same verse? وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا الْهَوَىٰ أَن تَعْدِلُوا وَتَعْرِضُوا. Don't follow your desires, perhaps you will turn away and become oppressors. That Malcolm was, no, this is not what it's not about me. It's about God. This thing is not about me. This is about Allah. It started with Allah and it'll end with Allah. If Allah is the truth, that's the only truth I'm committed to, right? That was Malcolm. That's an actual story that occurs. You could even listen to the recording. And Imam Mu'tadidin is one that literally takes that legacy. He's actually, you should make he's buried in Chicago, actually 30 minutes from here. So you should take a trip. He's actually buried in Chicago. You know what I'm saying? He's buried down the street from us, you know? He's actually, so I remember I went to a university once here. I won't mention the name because I just won't mention the name, but I gave a talk with about 200 kids, and I asked them, how many of you, they're all local Chicago kids, and I asked them, like, how many of you have ever heard the name Worthy Muhammad? None of them raised their hand. You know, and this is, we need to remember who we are. And this is one of the big problems even amongst us is as long as the black lineage, if you're from Pakistan, you should remember the ancestral history of your Islam. You should make dua every day for whoever took shahada in your family, in your lineage. You should pray for the one that took shahada. Because of their shahada, you're Muslim today. And know the history of your family, know the history of your lineage. Nasab is incredibly important in our tradition. Nasab is incredibly important. Lineage is important. And forgetting your lineage is forgetting who you are. And Allah says, "La takunu kalladhina nasu Allah fa'ansahum anfusahum." Don't be like the ones that forgot God. He made them forget themselves. He made them forget who they are. So you have to remember who you are and where you come from. You have to remember sort of the royalty, inshallah. I feel like I didn't answer the question.
No, I think you covered it pretty much well, and it was a good information. Session that 30 minutes we have thing to visit. Inshallah, that's a very good information for our community. So for just time constraint, maybe I will have like 2 more questions. So one question was like, how can the ICN community interact with CIC community and participate in their events or support their needs?
I think even more than CIC, I think at this point, it should. I think number one, I think you should recognize your strengths. That we have to be careful that we don't become white knights. Like we don't become the people that are coming in to save the day. That we approach this right now is Muhajirun and the Ansar. That should have the Muhajirun in the Ansar framework, where the Prophet ﷺ, when he comes to Medina with the Muhajirun, the first thing people say the first thing he did was build the Masjid al-Nabawi Sharif, right? But that's actually not the first thing that occurs. The first thing that happens was that he takes a anthropological categorization, and this is actually Khatib al-Baghdadi talks about this in his book, Shurut al-Mufti, the conditions of a Mufti, where kana yu'addidu an-nas, he counted people, wa sannifuhum, and he started categorizing them. These are the women, these are the children, these are the widows, these are the orphans, these are the Jews, the Christians, the poor. And then he starts doing one-on-one. He starts pairing Ansar and Muhajirun. He pairs the Ansar and the Muhajirun. And y'all remember Al-Safwa, the madrasa that the Prophet creates, and etc., etc. He starts pairing people up. I think that when you go in, you have to recognize the strengths that we have and the weaknesses that we have, and begin first and foremost with visitations. That you just go online and you look at whether it's Iman, whether it's Masjid Dawah in the west side of Chicago, that you just attend their events and you make your face familiar with them. You familiarize. Just call. Assalamu alaikum. We just want to say what's up, right? Not how can we help. Just how do we just want to say what's up. We want to go. We want to come over. We want to hang out. Can we do something? We'll sponsor the food, right? We'll take care of it. We'll bring it. We'll bring, you know what I'm saying? And bring your families. Don't just bring like these are the masjid delegates, right? It becomes like super like informal. It becomes like so formal. It's like we're trying to create like you know what I'm saying? Bring your families and just go hang out. I mean, and explore the South Side. Get to know, touch, and feel the South Side of Chicago, right? Smell it. Smell the best tacos best shrimp tacos you'll ever smell in your life. You know what I'm saying? Go look at the Jamaican Dhabiha Halal jerk chicken place that's over there that nobody knows about. It's like in the back of a place that a Muslim dude is like Allah necklace. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's got, you know what I'm saying, a diamond Allah necklace, alhamdulillah, in church, whatever, right? Just explore those joints. Explore those areas first and foremost, and familiarize with them before making it, and then create bonds of just attending events and then trying to just do things. Whether it's, the Prophet ﷺ, his first khutbah, according to Mullah Abdul Salam radiallahu anh, he says that the Prophet's first khutbah when he comes to Medina is Ashru Salam, spread peace amongst yourselves, wa at'amuhu at'am, and feed one another. Feed one another. I had a teacher that went to his teacher once, and he said, he studied with them for a number of years, and he said, "Ala targhabu sir, you want the secret to everything?" And the guy's like, "This is the moment. This is like Luke Skywalker, Yoda moment." You know what I'm saying? We're like, this is like the students giving the master the secret. He said, "Do you want?" He's like, "Yeah, of course." He said, "Amana, there's a huge trust. You need to take it." He's like, "You want the secret?" He said, "Come close." He said, "What is it?" He said, "Khubz." He said, "Bread." That's the secret. You want to serve bread. Just feed one another, right? Feed one another. Because one of the issues is like, when we see things that are happening in, may Allah protect us, in Kashmir, or in the things that are happening in the India regime right now that you're seeing, or things that are in Syria or Palestine, those faces are familiar to us. When we see a hijabi get accosted, you see your mom and you see your sister, right? It's difficult for you if you don't have, for the black people, for black communities, if you're not familiar and you don't have, like Allah says, if we binded your hearts together, if you spent all the wealth in the world, you wouldn't be able to bind their hearts. Allah bounded their hearts together. That if your hearts are bound, if your hearts are connected with one another and the hearts begin to speak, first and foremost, before all of the head work, you do the heart work. We do a lot of this strategizing, we forget about this piece. The religiosity, spirituality is here. It's not here, right? It's about naql, revelation, right? Naql comes to the heart of Rasulullah, right? So first it has to be, it gets synthesized by our head. This is strategy, but the seed is actually here. We begin to make really authentic relationships. Like people, we have a barbecue in my house all the time or whatever, and somebody came in and we have intergenerational Black Muslims, convert Black Muslims, white Muslims. We have Pakistani Muslims. You know, obviously, as you guys know, it's in Naperville, so a ton of like Hyderabadi Muslims. You know what I'm saying? Which you guys already know each other enough, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. And we have like Mexican Muslims in my house, and we had like Indonesian, literally like a ton of people that just come to our house and just hang out, literally. And somebody came in, like a new person said, "You have such you have such a diverse friend group," and it was like, we're not trying to be diverse. We just like each other. We just happen to be friends. We just like it's not like I'm trying to hit a quota. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not like affirmative friendship. It's just we're just really good friends. Like all of us love each other. Like we really love each other. Like we're family members. Like we're witnesses in each other's weddings. You know what I'm saying? Like we have each other on our like janaza list. Literally, a brother called me and was one of my close friends, and he said, "Brother, he's from an elderly Black Muslim statesman, and one of my probably the most definitive of all the work that I was honored to be a part of. The greatest moment I ever had was when COVID happened, and I almost cried. Was one of the elderly brother statesmen called me and he said, old Black leader, he said, "Assalamu alaikum, I just gave my daughter," his daughter is not Muslim, he said, "I gave my daughter your phone number. I let her know that if something happens to me, if Allah says, if the angel of death approaches me, then you're responsible for my janazah." You know what I'm saying? It was the most moving thing. Like, why am I, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a kid, like, who's this rookie have to do? Because how we love one another. We'll take bullets for one another. And I think it begins then. It begins right there. And then we can talk about strategizing. We can talk about all of that. But it begins with family. It begins with loving one another. You know? So,
yeah, after this pandemic is over, maybe we as ICN community, inshallah, we wanted to visit CAC with our families.
Yeah, I remember. I was there at the thing. Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, we may do that again, inshallah.
You're more than always welcome.
Yeah, and I mean, with that, I just want to thank our sponsor, like Sagar today. Like they were one of the sponsors for us. Brother Ayman, if you can show their flyer quickly, that would be really helpful if you can. Otherwise, if there is technical difficulties, it's okay. %10 discount today, alhamdulillah. So they have been continuously doing this. Like their last community dinner also, they provided us with a sponsorship, and this community dinner, I should call it as virtual community dinner. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us and have us to be in-person community dinner very soon. With that, Brother Umair, if I can request you to make a dua and then close the program. As part of ICN and ICN community and ICN board, I would like to thank you for your time and efforts today. Alhamdulillah, it was a very, very informative speech. As I said, my one page is full. I think I have to get your phone number from Brother Shahid and then call you in and then get like more information. Thank you, Brother Umair. With that, I request you to make a dua, please.
بسم الله الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله يا أكرم الأكرمين يا أول الأولين يا آخر الآخرين يا أول بلا بداية يا آخر بلا نهاية يا من له اسم بلا كنية اسمع نداءنا بما سمعت نداء زكريا عليه السلام اللهم نسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء والنور الذي ملأني أرشك العظيم وقامتها مع وانالك العظيم فصلى على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Allahumma, we ask you by all of your beautiful names, we ask you, O most beautiful, O most generous, O beginning without a beginning, O ending without an ending. We ask you, and we ask you by your mercy that encompasses everything in the light of your throne, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, to shower your peace and blessings upon our teacher, our prince, our king Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, upon his companions, and upon those that love him and follow his sunnah until the end of time. We ask you, Ya Allah, to bless the ICN community, fill it with light and barakah. We ask you to expand and to put blessings on all of the beloved elders, uncles, and the aunties of that community, and to all of the beautiful work they're doing. And we ask you, by their prayers, inshallah, to give the youth success, inshallah, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. We ask you to have mercy on all that we've lost within our communities, outside of our communities. Ya Allah, we ask you to make all of our graves Rawda min Riyad al-Jannah, a piece of heaven from the gardens of heaven. Ya Allah, we ask you to put light in our communities and to put sustenance in our communities and to keep us provided for and to keep us safe from any harm. We ask you to empower our young women and our children, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, our young women and men, Ya Allah. We ask you to make them imams, make them leaders, make them people that carry on the baton of Sayyidina Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and upon our companions and the ancestors and our scholars and our ancestors like Malcolm and Imam Murtadi Muhammad, may Allah have mercy on them. We ask you to bind the hearts between all ethnic groups. We ask you to take us any arrogance, any ethnocentrism, any hate, any grief from our heart, any bad feeling towards anybody. We ask you to make us know one another. We ask you to allow us to be amongst the Muslims that celebrate where we come from and celebrate where we are and celebrate our culture and celebrate our ancestors and celebrate those that come. We ask you to make us an ummah of celebration, Ya Allah. I ask you to make the Islamic Center of Naperville an abode of celebration, an abode of joy, an abode of light, and a place where people come with a place of healing, where people that are hurt with their anxieties come and they're healed by your light, Ya Allah, and they leave better than they came in, Ya Ghafur Rahim. We ask you, Nas'aluka Ya Allah, Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhab an-nar. Rabbana atina min ladunka rahma wa hayyi' lana min amrina rashada. Rabbana ighfir lana wa lil ladhina sabaquna fil iman wa la taj'al fi qulubina ghillan lil ladhina amanu rabbana innaka ra'ufur rahim. Nas'aluka husnal khatima wa nas'aluka husnal khatima. Nas'aluka husnal khatima wa nas'aluka ridak. نسألك رضاك نسألك رضاك ونسألك فردوس من جنة يا ذا الجلال والإكرام يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. فمتنا في كلمة الهدى في كلمة لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله فصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله لكم ألف خير إن شاء الله.
I mean, thank you so much, Brother Umair. Assalamu alaikum.